I want to start by saying, I'm not the type of person who scares easily. I grew up hunting with my dad in rural Kentucky, spent countless nights in the woods, and never once felt like something was wrong out there. So when I tell you what happened last October at that cabin in northern Minnesota, I need you to understand. This wasn't me being paranoid. This was real. My buddy Derek had rented a cabin about 40 miles outside of Duluth for a long weekend. 4 of us were supposed to go. Then, one by one, people dropped out. Derek got sick. Marcus had a family thing. By Friday afternoon, it was just me and an already paid reservation I didn't want to waste. I figured, fine, solo trip, some peace and quiet. I got there around 7 p.m. The cabin sat at the end of a half-mile dirt road, completely surrounded by birch trees. No neighbors, no cell service. The nearest gas station was 22 miles back. I remember thinking it was beautiful, in that isolated, melancholy kind of way. The kind of place that feels like the rest of the world just forgot about it. I settled in, made some food, built a fire. By 10 p.m., I was already half asleep on the couch. That's when I heard the knock. 3 slow knocks on the front door. Deliberate, not urgent, almost patient. I sat up. My first thought was a lost hiker, or maybe a neighbor I hadn't noticed. I called out, "Who's there?" Nothing. I waited a full minute, then cracked the door open. Nobody. Just the tree line, black and thick against the night sky. I told myself it was an animal bumping against the porch. A deer. Maybe raccoons. I went to bed. At 2 a.m., I woke up and I didn't know why. You know that feeling where your body pulls you out of sleep before your brain catches up? I was sitting upright in the dark, heart already going, and it took me a few seconds to realize what had woken me. There was a sound coming from outside the bedroom window, a low rhythmic scraping, like something dragging itself slowly across the exterior wall of the cabin. I grabbed my phone for the flashlight and looked out the window. There was a man standing at the tree line. He was just standing there, still, facing the cabin. He was wearing a dark jacket, and I couldn't make out his face, just the shape of him, this tall, unmoving silhouette, maybe 60 feet away. I froze. I watched him for what felt like an entire minute, and he did not move a single inch. I backed away from the window and grabbed the one thing I had, a hunting knife I'd packed out of habit. I checked the front door, locked. Back door, locked. I sat in the corner of the bedroom with my back against the wall, and I did not sleep. Around 4 a.m., I built up the nerve to look out the window again. He was closer. He was now standing at the edge of the porch. Same posture, same stillness, just waiting. And that was the thing that made my stomach drop. Not that he was there, but that he was clearly in no hurry, like he had all the time in the world. Like he knew I had nowhere to go. I made a decision right then. I was leaving. I grabbed my bag, my keys, my knife. I went to the back door because it opened away from where he was standing. I counted to 3, threw it open, sprinted around the side of the cabin to my truck, and I got in. As I reversed down that dirt road in the dark, my headlights swept across the front porch. He was standing right in front of the door, not moving, just watching me leave. I drove those 22 miles to the gas station doing 90 miles an hour, and I sat in that parking lot until the sun came up. When I finally had cell service, I called the county sheriff. They sent a deputy out to the property. He called me back 2 hours later. He said they found footprints in the mud around the entire perimeter of the cabin, not just the front and the tree line, all the way around, including directly beneath the bedroom window, where I'd been sleeping when I first woke up, and on the back porch, right outside the door I'd escaped from. He'd been circling the cabin the whole time I was inside. The deputy said they didn't find anyone. No ID, no vehicle, nothing left behind. I've thought about it almost every day since, about what would have happened if I hadn't woken up, if I hadn't looked out that window, if I had just stayed asleep. I don't go to remote places alone anymore, and I never will again. My Uncle Ron died in February 2006. Lung cancer, 7 weeks from diagnosis to funeral. He was 61, never married, no kids. I was his only living relative, and I didn't know him particularly well. He was my father's older brother, and my father had passed in 1999, and after that, Ron and I exchanged maybe 4 phone calls a year and a card at Christmas. He left me everything. Not that there was much. A checking account with around $4,000 in it, a 2001 Ford pickup, and a cabin in northern Wisconsin, near a town called Mercer, that I hadn't known he owned. I drove up in April once the snow had cleared, mostly to figure out what to sell and what to throw away. I'd decided before I even got there that I was going to list the property. I had no attachment to it. I'd never even known it existed. That bothered me a little on the drive up, actually. I'd known Ron my entire life, and he'd never once mentioned owning a cabin. My dad had never mentioned it either. It was a 2-hour drive, off the main highway, on increasingly narrow roads. The cabin sat on about 4 acres, surrounded by pine forest, on the edge of a small private lake. It was larger than I expected. 2 bedrooms, a full kitchen, a basement, well maintained. The exterior logs had been re-chinked recently. The roof was new. Ron had been putting money into this place. I let myself in with the key from his belongings and started walking through room by room, the way you do when you're assessing a property. Kitchen, living area, bedrooms, everything clean and orderly. Ron had been organized in life, and he was organized here. The basement door was padlocked. Not an unusual thing for a cabin. People store tools, outboard motors, things worth securing. But the padlock was a heavy-duty master lock, the commercial-grade kind, and it was new, shiny, no weathering at all. The key to it wasn't on Ron's keychain. I went through his belongings thoroughly, checked every drawer, every coat pocket, every surface. No key. I drove back into Mercer that afternoon and bought bolt cutters at the hardware store. I cut the lock and opened the basement door. It smelled like a filing room, that specific smell of paper and ink and enclosed air. I found the light switch and went down. The basement was completely finished, drywall, carpeted, dehumidified. Along one entire wall, floor to ceiling, were metal filing cabinets, 8 of them, all locked, all the same commercial grade as the padlock upstairs. In the center of the room was a wooden desk, and on the desk was a combination locked metal box, the size of a shoebox, with a handwritten label taped to it. The label said, "In case of my death, Ronald T. Mercer, private. My last name is Mercer." It was Ron's last name. Seeing it on that box in his handwriting in this room, I hadn't known existed, did something uncomfortable to my thinking. I took the box upstairs into the daylight and worked on it for 20 minutes with a flathead screwdriver until the latch gave. Inside was a single key on a plain ring and a handwritten letter addressed to me by name. I'm not going to reproduce the letter in full because parts of it are still part of an ongoing legal matter, but I'll tell you what it contained in plain terms. Ron had spent 31 years working for a company that contracted with 4 different county governments in Wisconsin and Minnesota. The work involved rural property management, abandoned land, estate properties, county-seized land. He had access to remote properties as part of his job, legitimate access, documented, unremarkable. The letter explained that the filing cabinets contained records, his records, 31 years of documentation he had kept himself, dates, locations, property addresses, photographs, and what he described as his own personal accounting of his activities at those properties. He didn't describe the activities directly in the letter. He used language I can only describe as deliberate distance, the way someone writes when they want to confess, without confessing. Phrases like what I did with the access I had, and the situations I created and managed, and the people whose paths crossed mine through those properties. He said he had kept the records because he believed documentation was important. He said he was leaving them to me because he trusted me to make the right decision about what to do with them. He said he was sorry. That was the last line. I'm sorry. No elaboration, no specific apology. Just those 2 words at the bottom of the page in his handwriting, slightly shakier than the rest, like he'd paused before writing it. I used the key from the box on the filing cabinets. I opened one drawer. I closed it again after approximately 45 seconds. I drove back into Mercer and called the Vilas County Sheriff's Department from a payphone outside a gas station. I told them I'd inherited a property and found documents that I believed law enforcement needed to see. I gave them the address, and I waited in my car at the end of the dirt road until 2 deputies arrived. I did not go back inside with them. I drove home to Milwaukee that night, and I did not sleep. Over the following months, the investigation expanded to involve the Wisconsin Department of Justice and law enforcement contacts in 3 Minnesota counties. I was interviewed 4 separate times. I retained an attorney immediately, which was the only smart thing I did in this entire situation. What I was eventually told, in careful measured language by a DOJ investigator, was that the records Ron kept were extensive and went back to 1974, that they were relevant to a number of open missing persons cases across 2 states, that several of those cases had been cold for over 20 years, that Ron's documentation, whatever his reason for keeping it, was, in the investigator's words, significant to multiple families. I want to be precise about what I do and don't know. I don't know exactly what Ron did. I know what the filing cabinets implied, and I know what I saw in that one open drawer in those 45 seconds, and I know I've never described it out loud to another person. I know that my uncle, who called me at Christmas, who sent my kids birthday cards with a $20 bill inside, who I stood next to at my father's funeral, had a second life that he maintained for 31 years inside a padlocked basement in northern Wisconsin. I know that the cabin sold as part of the estate and that I used exactly none of that money. The thing that has stayed with me, the thing that altered something permanently in how I understand people, is the records themselves, not what was in them. The fact that he kept them, organized, labeled, filed correctly, maintained for 3 decades. He wasn't documenting out of guilt. You don't maintain records for 31 years out of guilt. He kept them because he was proud of the organization, because it was his work, and he documented his work the way a professional documents his work. The cabin, the filing cabinets, the combination box, the letter, all of it was structured, planned. He had thought about dying, and he had thought about what would happen to his records, and he had made deliberate choices about it. He chose me. I don't know what that means. I've talked to a therapist about it for 2 years, and we haven't landed on what that means. What I know is that my uncle was not who I thought he was, that the people in our lives who seem the most unremarkable, the most average, the most ordinary, have interiors we never see. That normalcy is sometimes a practiced thing, a daily performance, and some people are very good at it for a very long time. Ron was good at it for 61 years, and then he put me in a basement and handed me the proof. I'm not looking for anything from telling this. Not closure, not responses, not to be believed. I've been sitting on it for a long time, and I needed to put it somewhere outside my own head. That's all this is. I've done property maintenance and winterization work in northern Minnesota for 11 years. End of season, I drive out to lake cabins, drain the pipes, shut things down, make sure the place survives the freeze. Most of my clients are out-of-state owners, I deal with them entirely by phone. Never meet them in person. October 2010. I got a new client through a referral. Man named Douglas, Arizona area code. He owned a cabin 40 miles northeast of Bemidji on a private lake. Said it had been closed up for 2 years. Health issues, couldn't make the trip. He needed a full inspection and condition report. He mailed me a key and a gate code. I drove out Tuesday morning, 1.5 miles of dirt road through heavy forest. The gate padlock opened fine. First thing I noticed when the cabin came into view, it looked too good. For a place sitting empty 2 years, it looked maintained. The firewood stacked along the exterior wall was freshly cut. Pale wood, not the weathered gray you get after 2 winters outside. I noted it and kept moving. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. It didn't smell like a closed cabin. No stale air, no mousetraps. No that specific, sealed-up smell you know after 11 years of this work. It smelled like wood smoke and something faintly like a kitchen after someone's been cooking. There was a coffee maker on the counter. I put my hand on the carafe. Warm. 2, maybe 3 hours old. I looked at the room properly then. 2 mugs in the drying rack, recently washed. A cast iron pan on the stove wiped down, but not fully clean. A dish towel over the oven handle, still slightly damp. Someone had been in this cabin that morning. I walked the rest of the space. On the side table in the living room, a library book. I checked the date slip inside. Checked out 12 days ago from Bemidji Public Library. In the bedroom, the bed was made the way you make it yourself, not the tight corners a cleaner leaves. On the floor beside it, work boots size 11, mud still fresh on the soles, and a paperback with a grocery receipt used as a bookmark. I looked at the receipt. Bemidji, 4 days ago. Eggs, bread, coffee, soup, batteries. I went outside and called Douglas in Arizona. I described everything. Warm coffee, library book, fresh groceries, boots. I asked if anyone had permission to be at the property. Long pause. He said no, absolutely not. I asked if his gate code had always been the same number. Another pause. He said yes, since 2011. Never changed it. I called Beltrami County Sheriff and waited at my truck. 2 deputies showed up 45 minutes later. We went through the cabin together. Nobody there. But what they found told a clear story. In the basement, a sleeping bag, extra clothing, a plastic bin, with 3 weeks of additional food. Organized and practical, not a random break-in. Someone had thought carefully about staying long-term. In the shed out back, 1 deputy found a backpack. Inside it were 3 things: a Minnesota state ID, a psychiatric discharge summary from a facility in Duluth, dated 14 months earlier, and a handwritten list, 1 page, headed with the word cabins, with 11 addresses in 2 columns. Douglas's cabin was 4th. Each address had a 1-word notation beside it. Good, too close, discovered, safe. The deputies ran the name from the ID. There was an active missing persons report filed by his sister 18 months ago, shortly after the psychiatric discharge, when he stopped making contact. The report had gone nowhere because there was no sign of harm, just a man who stopped answering his phone. What he had done in those 14 months was build a system. Public county property records tell you who owns land and where they live. He'd identified 11 seasonally vacant cabins with out-of-state owners. He researched them. He moved between them on a rotation. Safe meant long-term usable. Discovered meant he'd had to leave quietly. He'd been living inside other people's spaces, sleeping in their beds, cooking in their kitchens, sitting in their chairs, and disappearing before anyone arrived. They put out a description. I gave my statement and drove home. I've winterized close to 300 cabins in 11 years. I check the coffee pot first now, every single time. You own a seasonal property and haven't changed your gate code or locks in years. do it this week. If something feels recently used when it shouldn't, trust that. It probably was.